tell you very briefly, because I think it's one of the really, really brilliant and enduring contributions of the great traditions, particularly Vedanta and Vajrayana. And that is the whole notion that there is not just a spectrum of consciousness, but a spectrum of matter, a spectrum of matter energy. And that they literally sort of follow each other all the way up the scale. So on the interior, you can have a state of consciousness like waking, dreaming, deep sleep, meditative states, even big mind. But on the exterior of that, there's an actual body or energy that goes along with it. And so there's a gross body, and technically gross, subtle, and causal means just this. There's a gross body, a subtle body, and a causal body. And the traditions mean, for example, when you're in the dream state, there is no gross physical body. And so you're in the dream state and you are seeing other beings, you're having conversations, you're in an image body. They're in an image body, you can see them, you can still have emotions, you can still have thought, but there's no physicality in the dream state. So there are no rocks, no Gaia, no nature in that sense. But there's a whole realm of a kind of subtle bodies, and you are in a kind of a subtle body. And so they're giving a phenomenology of the fact that there's no consciousness that doesn't have some form of body or matter energy associated with it. So in the four quadrants, if you look at the upper left and the upper right, even though we tend to draw it, just have like atoms, molecules, cells, organisms, triune brains, stuff like that. That's sort of the gross physical aspect of that. But it's a whole spectrum of energy, gross, subtle, and causal energy. And there's a lot of work being done on measuring some of these subtle energies, and subtle energy medicine has made huge strides in this. It's not well known, but the empirical research on this is quite substantial. Most people have heard about Kirlian photography and stuff like that, which is the worst of that kind of evidence. But that kind of stuff is out there. The traditions maintain that every mind has a body. But again, there's gross, subtle, causal mind, gross, subtle, causal bodies. And that's a very profound notion, because what it does mean is that, for example, in the Bardo realm, and you may or may not want to believe in reincarnation, but if you do, the traditions explain it, that the body that carries you from one physical body to the next body is a subtle body, the same subtle body you have in the dream state. So you have a consciousness and a body in the subtle realm. And that, so you have, in a sense, a gross body mind, a subtle body mind, and a causal body mind. That's a very profound way to handle the mind-body problem. But it also allows something that merely saying I'm physically embodied only allows something that won't, which is you can still have transmigration, because the physical body mind can die and the subtle body mind can transmigrate. But it still has its own body. And even the causal, which is deep dreamless sleep, for example, or states of formless meditation, there's said to be a causal or a very subtle body made of the very, very finest matter energy or mass energy. And so each of those gross, subtle, and causal energy are things that you could see in the exterior world if you had the appropriate eyes. So some people see auras, for example, subtle kinds of subtle energy. And we can actually start to measure these with very sophisticated machines that are working on subtle energy machines. But none of the interiors can be seen. None of your interiors can be seen. And that's what makes them so, well, you can't put your finger on them. So right now, for example, in the lower left quadrant, mutual understanding. Right now we have mutual understanding, where we're attempting to understand each other. Where is mutual understanding? Can you point to it? Can you put your finger on it? If you have a desire, where is desire? Can you actually point to it, say it's here or it's there? When you feel love, where do you feel? Other than the projectile vomiting. Where do you feel love? All the interiors don't have this kind of simple location, but the extraordinary thing that the traditions of Vedanta and Vajrayana said is that nonetheless these consciousness, they all ride on bodies, they ride on energies. And the whole secret of Tantra is that you can better get into these states of consciousness if you know how to manipulate these body energies. So it's often said to be sexual energies, but that's just part of the spectrum. There's the gross, subtle, and causal energies, or a whole spectrum of sexual energy, if you want to think about it that way, bodily energies. And by using mudras, by using concentration techniques, you can get control of some of your bodily energies, and those will evoke the state of consciousness. So that includes extended periods of having sex, for example, sexual intercourse, because that can raise very, very strong subtle energies and can help you get into an interior state of, well, sex wonderfully concentrates the mind, doesn't it? Sex and death. So these are two wonderful things you can use for meditation. If you've got a wandering, if a guy's got a wandering mind, show him a naked woman. It's instant samadhi. It's like, wow. So, yeah. So it's a clever use of those kinds of energies that can help focus the mind, both men and women. So the answer to the question, is there ever an interior without an energy or this or that? And I would say no. Not in the relative plane. And I think that's what's so interesting about it. I would say all four quadrants arise simultaneously. The four quadrants are four aspects of anything that arises in the relative plane, whether it's gross or subtle or causal. In the dream state, there are others. You see other beings in the dream state. And that's the lower right. If there's any communication with them at all, that's the lower left. That's your understanding. There is communication occurring there. None of these things tend to arise by themselves. They're all mutually interwoven. So all four quadrants tend to arise. And it does mean that in any of these, even if you're disembodied infinite formless consciousness, we're not talking about big mind now. That's absolute. We're talking all relative manifestation. In that case, gross, subtle, and causal. Causal is taken to be the subtlest of the manifest forms arising in big mind. So even causal in Vedanta, for example, has a subtle bliss energy associated with it. And so it stops consciousness from ever being disembodied. And that's a really extraordinary, profoundly integrated kind of notion. But it also stops us from pulling back into what we think can be merely abstract conscious disembodied states, because there isn't any.